Rain has a way of remembering what people try to forget. It clings to the roof of the old Whitmore house, trickling through the eaves and whispering against the attic windows like it's trying to speak a language long drowned in silence. The air smells of cedar and dust, the kind that sits heavy in rooms that haven't been opened in decades. A woman, no longer young but not yet old, stands beneath the low ceiling, a flashlight trembling in her hand. Her name is not yet important. What matters is that she is here, returning to a house she once promised herself she would never step into again. She came only to clean, or so she told herself, to pack up her late aunt's belongings and sell the property before the end of autumn. The house had been empty for years, a structure suspended between memory and decay. Every object seemed to watch her: the lace curtains, the faded wallpaper, the half-open door that leads to the attic stairs. When she climbs them, each step groans like an old wound reopening. The attic greets her with stillness. Time feels slower here, as if the air itself refuses to move. She waves her flashlight across forgotten trunks and boxes labeled in a delicate, slanted hand. Winter coats, 1988. Toys keep. The beam stops on a small dresser tucked beneath the slanted beam, its paint flaking, its handles rusted. On instinct, she crouches and pulls one drawer open. Inside, moth-eaten linens, a cracked porcelain doll, nothing unusual. But the second drawer sticks halfway, resisting, as if something inside it doesn't want to be found. She tugs harder until it comes free, with a soft gasp of wood. What lies inside stops her breath. 2 small dresses, hand-sewn, folded with meticulous care. Pale blue cotton, trimmed with lace, identical down to every stitch. They are child-sized, far too small for anyone in this house now. Beneath them, wrapped in yellowed tissue paper, is a photograph. The image is faint, the colors faded to sepia. 2 twin girls, standing side by side in a backyard of autumn leaves, holding each other's hands. They were the same dresses now lying before her. Their smiles are shy, their eyes almost too bright, reflecting the light like mirrors. On the back of the photo, written in a careful hand, are the words, Lily and Mara, October 14th, 1990. She freezes. The name tugs at a place in her memory she thought had long gone quiet. Lily and Mara Whitmore, the missing twins, the ones the town stopped talking about 30 years ago. She remembers the whispers in the grocery store when she was a child, the headlines, the search parties in the woods. But that was a story belonging to another lifetime, a myth buried in old newspaper columns. So what were their dresses doing here in her aunt's attic? The flashlight flickers. For a moment, the attic feels smaller, the air tighter. She runs her fingers over the photo, tracing the outline of the girls' faces, feeling the slight indentation of pen against paper. Something about the picture is wrong, not frightening, but wrong in a way she can't name. The twins seem too still, their mirrored postures too perfect, as though a photographer captured not motion but reflection. A shiver crawls up her spine. She notices a small detail she missed before. Behind the girls, in the shadowed corner of the image, there's a faint outline of something, a shape like a doorway, or perhaps an opening to a dark space. She brings the photo closer to the light, squinting, but just then, a cold breeze ripples through the attic, brushing the edges of the dresses. The flashlight dims again, as if reacting to a presence she cannot see. She places the items back into the drawer, but her hands are trembling. The drawer slides shut with a dull thud, the sound echoing too long in the rafters. The attic feels heavier now, the silence deeper. She turns to leave but glances back once, and in that instant, she could swear the top drawer, the one she hadn't touched, shifts ever so slightly open on its own. The narrator's voice enters softly, like a whisper through rain. Some drawers are better left unopened, yet when one finally is, it does not reveal what was lost, only what refused to stay buried. Outside, thunder rumbles across the Washington sky. The woman stands at the top of the attic stairs, the photo still clutched in her shaking hand, as if unsure whether she has uncovered something belonging to the past, or something that has been waiting patiently for her return. Summer in Maple Hollow, Washington, in 1990, looked like something out of a photograph that had never learned how to age. The air shimmered with warmth, Cicadas droned from trees, and the scent of wet pine hung over every porch. It was a place where everyone knew everyone, or at least they liked to believe they did. A town tucked between hills and mist, its mornings golden, its nights filled with a slow hum of sprinklers and faraway trains. The kind of town that never expected tragedy, because it had never truly met it. Lily and Mara Whitmore were the mirror at the center of that perfect reflection. 9 years old, born 2 minutes apart on an April morning that still lived in their mother's favorite story. Identical in every way that counted. Same pale hair, same sea glass eyes, same quiet curiosity that made them seem older than their years. But those who knew them best, like their teacher Mrs. Halpern, would say they were not quite identical at all. Lily was the sunlight, she recalled, and Mara was the echo. The twins moved through the world as if joined by invisible thread. They had a secret language, not gibberish, but something closer to music. Rhythmic syllables whisper between them when they didn't want adults to understand. They called it mirror talk. In their diaries, found years later, they wrote about it as though it were a place. The mirror world is where we go when it's too quiet here. Their parents, Margaret and Thomas Whitmore, were pillars of Maple Hollow's fragile sense of normalcy. Margaret, soft-spoken and kind, volunteered at the church bake sales. Thomas worked at a hardware store and was known for his meticulous carpentry. Yet, there was something about their house, the tall white one with the slanted roof and ivy that never stopped growing, that people described as too quiet. Neighbors would later remember that Margaret often stood at the window, watching her daughters play in the yard, her expression unreadable. Thomas, on the other hand, rarely smiled. He was precise in everything he did, almost obsessive about symmetry. He built the twins' cribs himself, identical down to the last nail. Even their bedroom, tucked beneath the attic, was arranged in perfect balance. 2 beds, 2 lamps, 2 dolls, facing each other like reflections that refused to blink. Lily and Mara loved the attic most of all. It was their world, a space filled with dust, secrets, and echoes of forgotten laughter. They would spend entire afternoons up there, whispering stories into old boxes and pretending the beams above them were constellations. They weren't afraid of the dark. They said the attic was alive in a nice way. Sometimes, neighbors could hear them laughing through the open window, voices overlapping like a song sung in harmony. The summer before they disappeared was unusually long. The days stretched endlessly, the sunsets too beautiful to be real. The twins could often be seen pulling a red wagon to the town's gravel roads, collecting bottle caps, feathers, and things no one else wanted. They said they were building something. When asked what, they'd simply reply, a secret. At the local festival that July, they won second place in the costume contest, both dressed as the same character, an angel with mirrored wings made from tinfoil and thread. When the mayor asked them on stage who came up with the idea, they pointed at each other and said in unison, "She did." The crowd laughed, charmed, unaware that the symmetry they found adorable was, for the twins, something deeper. They had begun to talk about reflections more often. At school, they drew mirrors, eyes, doorways. Mrs. Halpern once found a note on Lily's desk that read, "We can trade places if we do it right. We just have to count to 9 and look at each other the whole time." When she asked about it, both girls simply smiled, the same small, eerie smile that made even the teacher pause. Margaret brushed it off as childish imagination. "They've always had that twin world," she'd say. "It's how they comfort each other." Thomas, though, seemed unsettled. One evening, a neighbor overheard him arguing with his wife in the yard. His voice was sharp, trembling with anger. "You let them stay up there too long," he said. "You let them build whatever that is." The rest of the words were swallowed by the night wind. Yet, to anyone outside the Whitmore home, the family seemed idyllic, a portrait of small-town happiness framed in sunlight and routine. The girls' laughter floated through open windows. Their mother tended her garden, and their father sanded wood in the garage until twilight. But under that surface harmony, something was shifting. Subtle, almost imperceptible, like a crack beneath polished glass. As summer drew toward its end, the girls became quieter. They still played, still smiled, but their eyes often wandered toward the attic window. Margaret would sometimes find them awake at night, sitting on their beds, hands clasped, listening to something she couldn't hear. Once, she asked what they were doing. Lily looked up and said softly, "We're waiting for the same dream." The next morning, the girls didn't eat breakfast. They drew instead twin sketches of a wooded path, lined with birch trees, leading to a dark opening that looked like a door. On the bottom corner of each page, they signed their names side by side. L plus M equals 1. No one knew what to make of it then. It was just another drawing. Just another summer day in Maple Hollow, a town untouched by fear. The air was still sweet, the creek still whispered, and the twins still waved at neighbors from their red wagon. But looking back, those days were the last time the world around them would ever make sense. It was a season suspended in golden light, one that would never end for those who lived through it, because part of it never did. Somewhere between their laughter and their silence, between the attic and the woods, something had already begun to vanish. It began on a Sunday, the kind of autumn morning that smelled of cinnamon and rain-soaked leaves. The air was cool enough to make breath visible, yet the sun still clung to the tips of the trees, as if unwilling to let go of summer. In Maple Hollow, people were waking slowly, church bells chiming from a hilltop, the scent of coffee drifting through half-open kitchen windows. No one knew that by noon, every clock in town would feel as though it had stopped. Lily and Mara Whitmore had spent the previous night chattering about the fall festival. It was their favorite day of the year: caramel apples, hay rides, the petting zoo. Their mother brushed their hair into matching braids that morning, fastened them with blue ribbons, and kissed the crowns of their heads. "Stay together," she reminded them gently. The twins nodded in unison, as they always did, their movements perfectly mirrored, their voices overlapping. Always. The festival was a kind of small-town dream people romanticize. Laughter over crackled popcorn, a local band playing under orange bunting, children darting between pumpkin displays. The Whitmore twins were seen everywhere, trying to win stuffed bears at the ring toss, feeding goats at the petting pen, their red wagon filled with trinkets and candy wrappers. They were last noticed near the booth selling press leaves sealed in glass frames. They were holding hands, one witness later recalled, and they looked like they were whispering to each other. Around 2:45 p.m., the weather shifted. The wind grew colder, the light dimmer. The twins told a friend they were going home early, that their mother had promised them hot cocoa. They started walking down Birchwood Road, pulling the wagon behind them. It was a familiar path, a straight route past the old church in the woods that bordered their neighborhood. They never made it past the bend. When Margaret realized they hadn't returned by 4 o'clock, she assumed they were still playing at a friend's house. By 5:30, she began calling neighbors. By 6 o'clock, she was standing on her porch, scanning the street, her hands trembling. When Thomas came home from work, his face drained of color the moment he saw her empty gaze. The first call to the sheriff came at 6:14 p.m. Within the hour, patrol cars were tracing the roads, volunteers gathering near the churchyard. Flashlights cut through the growing dusk as rain began to fall in delicate sheets. The red wagon was found half-tipped on its side at the edge of the woods, one of its wheels caught in mud. Inside were the girls' candy wrappers, a few stones, and 2 identical charms, small silver circles engraved with an infinity symbol. No footprints beyond that point. No sign of struggle. No sound. As night fell, the entire town became part of the search. The local diner stayed open late, serving coffee to exhausted volunteers. Strangers combed through ditches and creeks, shouting the twins' names until their voices went hoarse. A neighbor swore she heard laughter near the old mill pond, but when they reached it, there was only the sound of frogs and a reflection of flashlights trembling on the water. By dawn, the rain had washed away nearly every trace. The sheriff stood at the edge of the woods, staring into the fog. "It's like they were never here," he muttered. His deputy, younger and softer spoken, added quietly, "Or like they never left." The following days blurred into one another. Helicopters circled overhead, dogs sniffed through underbrush, and news crews arrived from nearby towns. The photograph of Lily and Mara, smiling identical, framed by sunlight, was printed on every telephone pole and store window. Yet the more their faces appeared, the more surreal they seemed, like copies of the same ghost haunting every corner of Maple Hollow. Margaret refused to leave the house. She sat by the window in the twins' room, waiting, listening. The attic above creaked in the wind, a slow, rhythmic sound that made her heart race, though she didn't know why. She told police she could still hear her daughters laughing sometimes, faintly, as if playing upstairs. Thomas stopped sleeping altogether. He patrolled the woods alone at night, flashlight trembling, calling their names into the fog until the sound dissolved into nothing. On the third night, a deputy brought something back from the creek, a drawing half soaked in mud. 2 stick figures holding hands beneath a large circle that could have been a sun or a mirror. The initials L and M were written beneath it. It was the only clue they'd find that week. Rumors began to bloom like mold in damp corners of the town. Some whispered that the twins had been taken by a drifter who'd been seen near the highway. Others spoke of an older story, one that predated the Whitmores, about the woods behind Birchwood Road being thin, a place where the world bent on itself. The sheriff dismissed it as grief-fueled nonsense, but even he couldn't shake the feeling that the case didn't fit the logic of other missing child reports he'd handled. There were no footprints, no struggle, no witnesses, just a vanishing that felt more like erasure. As the days stretched into weeks, the search turned ritualistic. Every dawn, Thomas would walk to the woods, stand by the creek, and whisper both girls' names into the mist. Margaret kept their beds made, their toys untouched. She began leaving the attic light on at night, saying it made her feel like the house was still awake. Reporters left. Neighbors grew quiet. Maple Hollow went from restless to numb. At the end of October, the sheriff announced what everyone already knew but refused to say aloud. The twins were presumed gone. The case remained open, though no leads remained. At the final community vigil, candles flickered in the cold air, their flames trembling like tiny hearts trying to stay alive. The pastor spoke about faith, about finding meaning in loss. But his words were swallowed by the silence that followed. When Margaret was asked if she wanted to say something, she simply shook her head. Her eyes drifted toward the church rafters, to the dark shape of the attic window, faintly visible from the road. The narrator's voice emerges then, low and measured, filled with melancholy. Some towns never recover from silence. They just learn how to build their lives around it. Maple Hollow didn't lose 2 children that October. It lost its reflection, and for the next 30 years, it would try to pretend the mirror had never cracked. And with that, the story of the missing twins became less a case and more a legend, the kind told in hushed voices, when the air turns cold and rain begins to whisper against the glass. Winter came early that year, as if the sky itself wanted to bury what Maple Hollow refused to face. By November, the search parties had thinned to a handful of volunteers walking through sleet. The Whitmore house sat at the end of Birchwood Road, its windows dark, its garden brittle with frost. A single porch light flickered through the nights, burning like a small, desperate prayer that no one believed would be answered. The town changed quietly, almost politely, the way people change when grief is too heavy to carry in public. The posters of Lily and Mara, once bright and hopeful, faded on telephone poles, their edges curling inward. Store clerks began taking them down after Christmas, pretending it was out of respect. Parents started walking their children to school again. Conversations grew shorter. Laughter, when it came, sounded careful, as though joy might be mistaken for cruelty. The Whitmores became ghosts among the living. Margaret stopped attending church, stopped answering the door. She moved through the house like a shadow, keeping everything just as it had been. The twins' shoes lined neatly by the door, their toothbrushes still in the bathroom cup, their beds turned down each night as though sleep were just running late. She began writing letters to her daughters, pages upon pages of confessions, questions, and memories. She never mailed them, only folded them into a tin box she kept in the attic drawer. Thomas changed in a different way. He kept busy, as men of his generation were taught to do. He rebuilt the porch steps, repaired the roof, sanded the banister until it gleamed. His hands stayed raw from work that never seemed to end. Some nights, neighbors said they saw a light moving in the attic long past midnight. A faint glow, flickering as though from a single lamp. When asked about it, Thomas simply said, "It's easier to sleep when the house isn't so dark." The attic became his sanctuary, and in time, Margaret's fear. She said she could hear him moving up there, hammering, dragging boxes, sometimes speaking softly as if answering voices only he could hear. Once, she climbed halfway up the stairs before stopping. She heard laughter, 2 identical giggles, faint as dust in the rafters. She called his name. The sound stopped instantly, and he appeared in the doorway, pale, trembling. "You shouldn't come up here," he told her. "It's not for you." After that night, she never climbed those stairs again. In the spring of 1991, a counselor from the county came to check on the Whitmores. She found Margaret sitting on the porch, barefoot despite the cold. "Sometimes," Margaret said, her eyes on the horizon, "I think they're still here, not gone, just somewhere in between." The counselor noted it as delusional grief. Thomas refused to speak during the visit. By summer, the Whitmore house had begun to rot around them. Paint peeled, ivy climbed unchecked, and the garden filled with weeds. Mail piled up unopened. The smell of damp would creep through the halls. People stopped visiting altogether, partly out of discomfort, partly out of fear. The town didn't know what to do with a house that reminded them of failure. It was easier to let it fade. Maple Hollow, too, began to erase itself. The woods where the girls vanished were renamed on local maps. The fall festival was canceled for a few years, then quietly revived under a new name. Children growing up after 1995 didn't even know about the twins. Only the older residents remembered, and even they rarely spoke of it. The silence became a kind of weather. It settled into everything. The way people avoided Birchwood Road after dark, the way the pastor skipped certain topics in his sermons, the way Margaret's grocery deliveries were left neatly at the edge of her porch, never handed directly to her. Grief has a way of distorting time. For Margaret, days folded into one another until years lost their meaning. For Thomas, the attic became both punishment and refuge. He kept building, shelves, boxes, compartments, perfectly measured, perfectly symmetrical. Once, a plumber who came to fix a leaking pipe said Thomas had added new panels under the roof, so precise it looked like he was building another room. No one knew what he meant. By the late 1990s, the Whitmores were barely spoken of. A generation grew up without remembering their names. Margaret's hair turned white, her voice grew faint, and her husband stopped being seen entirely. Some whispered he'd left her. Others thought he'd gone mad and locked himself away. But the house stayed the same, light in the attic, silence in every other window. It wasn't until 2003 that a realtor tried to sell the property. She lasted one day inside. The air was wrong, she told a friend, like the walls were listening. She refused to explain further, only mentioning that she'd heard what sounded like children's footsteps above her while she stood in the kitchen, though the attic was locked. After that, the house returned to vacancy, inherited quietly by distant relatives who lived elsewhere. The story of the missing twins faded into what Maple Hollow did best, forgetting. New families arrived, new shops opened, and the old names became whispers that only surfaced on rainy nights. But every so often, someone driving past the end of Birchwood Road would see the attic window flicker, one brief golden pulse of light, and think for just a moment that maybe the town had never really moved on at all, because Maple Hollow didn't simply bury its past. It built around it. Each new season grew over the old one like a layer of paint covering a stain that would always bleed through. Every cracked sidewalk, every flickering street lamp, seemed to hum faintly with what the town refused to name. And in that stillness, that deliberate silence, the Whitmore house remained untouched, an artifact of unfinished mourning, a place where the world had stopped breathing, and no one dared ask it to start again. The key to the attic stuck a little before turning, as if the lock itself were reluctant to remember what it had been made to guard. The woman, Emily, pressed her palm against the cold brass and exhaled. Dust rose around her like sighs when the door finally creaked open. It had been 30 years since she'd last stepped foot in this house, and yet it felt as though she'd never left. The scent of cedar, mothballs, and something faintly sweet, like old paper and lilacs, filled her lungs. Time didn't live here the way it did elsewhere. It sat in corners, patient, folded neatly into drawers. She had come only to clear the house for sale. Her Aunt Margaret's funeral was quiet, attended by only a handful of people who still remembered her as the woman who used to bring pies to the church fair. No one mentioned the twins. No one mentioned the attic. Emily had driven 5 hours from Spokane, the long road winding through fog and forest, repeating to herself that she wasn't coming here for ghosts, just for closure. But standing at the foot of those narrow attic stairs, she realized closure wasn't what the house wanted to give. She climbed slowly, each step groaning beneath her weight. The air grew colder as she reached the landing. The attic looked almost untouched, trunks stacked against the wall, shelves sagging beneath books and fabric. And there it was again, the little dresser by the far beam, the same one she'd opened days earlier. She hesitated, half expecting to see those 2 blue dresses waiting inside, but she'd already taken them out, sealed them in a storage box. Still, the drawer seemed to hum softly in the quiet. Emily set her flashlight on a crate and began sorting through boxes. Inside one, she found a pile of newspaper clippings, yellowed, brittle, folded and refolded until the edges had nearly disintegrated. Every headline carried the same echo of tragedy. Twin sisters vanish without trace. Maple Hollow in mourning. Police baffled by lack of evidence. Parents plead for answers. Each article was marked with faint pencil notes in the margins, Margaret's handwriting, little observations. They never mentioned the mirror. Thomas says they heard them upstairs again last night. Another box held a faded manila envelope labeled Evidence Returned, 1992. Inside were photocopies of police reports, a map of the search radius, and a Polaroid photograph. A creek bed blurred by rain. Written beneath it, in Margaret's handwriting, was a single line. They aren't gone. They're hidden. Emily's pulse quickened. The handwriting was steady, almost defiant, as though Margaret had refused to surrender to the official story. She pulled another envelope from the box, smaller this time. Inside was an undeveloped film roll. The label read, Festival 1990, T. W. Thomas Whitmore's initials. She didn't own a camera that could process it, but she held it up to the light anyway. Something about the film's shadow coil felt heavier than its size allowed, as though it carried not just images, but memory itself. She slipped it into her coat pocket, without thinking. As she continued through the boxes, she began to feel a rhythm to the house, a quiet pulse that matched her breath. She found an old music box that still played when wound, its melody tinny and slow, a lullaby that made the air feel smaller. She sat on the floor as the tune wound down, looking up at the ceiling beams where thin strands of cobweb caught the light. Her aunt had lived alone in this silence for so many years. How had she managed to bear it? Beneath a pile of winter coats, Emily found a notebook wrapped in linen. The cover was cracked leather, its pages lined with tight handwriting. The first entry was dated March 1991. They say grief changes shape, but it doesn't. It only learns to hide where no one will look. I think they're still here. I hear them sometimes, laughing through the boards. Thomas says it's the wind, but the wind doesn't say my name. Each entry grew more fragmented. There were mentions of dreams, of mirrors, of the attic shifting at night. In one passage, Margaret wrote, "The drawer moves on its own now. It opens when I pray and closes when I stop." Another note, written in shaky pen, "Thomas won't tell me what he built above the beams. He says it's balance. I say it's madness." Emily closed the book and stared at the small dresser again. The air seemed thicker now, as though her discovery had changed the oxygen itself. The attic felt sentient, aware. She whispered aloud without meaning to, "What did you do up here?" Her voice sounded too loud in the stillness. The flashlight flickered, then steadied. For a moment, she thought she heard something, faint, rhythmic, like a child humming behind the wall. She froze, listening. Nothing, just a slow expansion of wood as the night air shifted. She exhaled, laughed softly at her own nerves, and shook her head. But when she turned back toward the boxes, the notebook had slipped off her lap and fallen open to a page near the back. The entry read, "If anyone finds this, don't open the second drawer. Some things are not meant for light." Emily closed the notebook carefully. her heartbeat echoing in her throat. She placed it back where she'd found it and stood, brushing dust from her jeans. As she turned to leave, she noticed something small caught beneath the leg of a trunk, an old sheriff's badge, rusted and bent. She picked it up, recognizing the faint engraving. Sheriff Daniels, 1990. The man who had led the original search. Why was it here? The question lingered with her as she descended the stairs, one hand gripping the railing, the other clutching the badge. The house groaned around her, every creak like the slow inhale of something ancient. She paused halfway down and looked back toward the attic door. For just a second, she thought she saw a faint sliver of light from beneath it. Warm, golden, steady. Downstairs, she sat at the kitchen table where her aunt had once baked pies. The walls were peeling, the floor cold beneath her feet. She spread out the artifact before her, the film roll, the notebook, the sheriff's badge, 3 small pieces of a puzzle that had waited decades to be found. Outside, rain began to fall again, just as it had that October day. It tapped against the windows like fingertips. Emily opened one of the old newspaper clippings and read the headline aloud, her voice trembling. No trace of the Whitmore twins found after 30 days of searching. She folded it shut, whispering to herself, maybe you just didn't look in the right place. The camera would linger on her face then, lit only by the kitchen lamp, eyes wide with a dawning sense that the truth wasn't lost. It had been waiting. The attic wasn't finished speaking, and Emily, whether she liked it or not, had begun to listen. Morning broke gray and brittle over the old Whitmore house, the kind of light that doesn't promise warmth, only exposure. Emily barely slept. Her dreams had been tangled in half-heard whispers and footsteps that never reached her door. When she finally rose, she felt a heaviness in her chest, the sense that something had shifted overnight, not in her, but in the house itself. It no longer felt indifferent. It felt watchful. She made coffee on the old stove, the smell bitter in the damp air. The kitchen clock had stopped at 3:11, its ticking hand frozen mid-step. She hadn't noticed it the night before. Now, that stillness unnerved her. She found herself glancing up at it again and again, as though waiting for clock to resume, to exhale, to let time start moving again. By mid-morning, she decided to drive into town. She needed air. She also needed answers. The names written in her aunt's notebook, the badge in her pocket, the film roll, it all pointed to something deliberate. If Sheriff Daniels had left his badge in the attic, it wasn't by accident. The drive into Maple Hollow was shorter than she remembered. The town hadn't changed much, just aged quietly, like the pages of a forgotten book. The diner still stood on the corner of Main Street, its sign flickering between Eat and A. Inside, the same waitress who'd serve her as a child poured coffee with a hand that trembled slightly. Her name tag read Marla. Emily approached hesitantly. You used to know my aunt, Margaret Whitmore. Marla's eyes flicked up from the cup she was filling. For a moment, recognition didn't come. Then it did, slowly, followed by something else, wariness. Margaret, she said softly. Haven't heard that name in a while. You're her niece, right? From Spokane? Emily nodded. I'm clearing out the house. I found some things. Marla's face didn't change, but her hands stilled. You mean about the girls? It wasn't a question. Yes, Emily said. Do you remember what happened? The woman hesitated, then poured another cup and slid it across the counter. Everyone remembers. It was a 4th of July festival, 1990. The girls were with your uncle at the fairgrounds. They were selling lemonade, I think. Then they were just gone. No one saw a thing. No screams, no struggle. Just 2 empty cups on the table. Emily felt the words settle into her like stones. She'd been only 5 then, too young to recall the details. Just the echo of it. Her mother cry in the kitchen, the adults whispering that some houses don't heal right after loss. Sheriff Daniels led the search. Marla continued. Good man, but the case broke him. Said he'd never seen a place swallow something so completely. He quit the force a year later. Do you know what happened to him? Marla shook her head. Left town. Rumor was he'd started talking about things nobody wanted to hear. Voices in the woods. Strange lights near the creek. Folks said he lost his mind. Maybe he did. But he wasn't wrong about one thing. There was something off about that attic. Emily's throat tightened. You been inside it? Once, Marla said, her voice dropping lower. Back when the search teams were checking the house. They brought dogs. The moment they reached the top of those stairs, the animals went still, not scared, just listening. And then one of them started whining at the dresser. I remember the sheriff said, "We'll come back to it." But they never did. Emily felt a chill crawl up her spine. Why not? Marla's eyes drifted toward the window, where mist was rolling down from the hills. Because Margaret begged them not to, said she'd already lost enough, said the house had a way of keeping what it wanted. The words lingered in the air like smoke. Emily finished her coffee and left without another word. Outside, the town seemed unnaturally quiet. Even the wind held its breath. On her way back, she stopped by the library, a brick building with fading murals of the town's founding. Inside, the archivist was a young man named David, thin and polite, with the kind of curiosity that made him seem out of place in a dying town. When Emily mentioned her aunt's name, his eyebrows rose. Margaret Whitmore, he said, typing quickly. There's a file on the case, but it's restricted. I can't show you police evidence, but I can tell you the rumors. I'll take rumors, she said. He leaned closer. People said the twins weren't supposed to be with Thomas that day. They were supposed to go to their grandmother's, but Margaret changed her mind last minute, said something about the mirror breaking. Emily froze. The mirror? He nodded. Apparently, there was this big antique mirror in the attic, brought over from Europe in the 1800s. Locals thought it was cursed. They said it showed reflections that didn't match the room. Emily's pulse quickened. What happened to it? No one knows. After the twins disappeared, the mirror vanished too. Police thought it might have been stolen, but there was no sign of a break-in. The story sounded impossible, and yet it fit with the fragments she'd found. Her aunt's notes about reflections, the drawer that opened and closed by itself, the unspoken warnings. That night, back at the house, the fog had thickened. She parked the car and stood in the driveway, staring up at the attic window. A faint flicker of light pulsed behind the curtain, steady, rhythmic. She hadn't left any lights on. Inside, the house was colder than it had been. The boards creaked beneath her feet like soft sighs. She climbed the stairs again, one hand trailing the wall. When she reached the attic door, she paused, breath fogging in the air. The light under the door flickered once, then went dark. She opened it. The flashlight beam cut through dust. The dresser sat where she'd left it. The drawers were shut. The air was still, and yet something was different. The old notebook she placed beside the trunk was gone. In its place, on the floorboards, lay the sheriff's badge. Clean now, polished to a dull gold shine. Emily knelt slowly. Her fingers trembled as she picked it up. Beneath it, faintly etched into the wood, were 3 words carved in careful letters, behind the wall. Her breath caught. She turned toward the far beam, where the slanted roof met the floor. The boards there looked newer, smoother than the rest, replaced at some point. The scent of cedar was stronger near them, mingled with something else, something metallic. She whispered to the empty air, "Aunt Margaret, what did you hide?" Silence. And then, so faint she almost thought she imagined it, a soft sound from within the wall. 2 notes of a lullaby, the same one from the music box. Emily stepped back, pulse racing, and for the first time she realized that she wasn't just uncovering history. She was walking into something that had never stopped. The attic wasn't a memory. It was an echo still answering itself. Rain hammered the roof that night, like a confession waiting to be heard. Emily sat on the attic floor, the polished badge glinting faintly in the beam of her flashlight. Behind the wall, the words burned in her mind. The rational part of her whispered that this could all be coincidence, a trick of the light, a child graffiti from years ago. But deep down, she knew better. There was intent in those carved letters. They weren't random. They were a message left for someone who would one day come looking. The house groaned around her, shifting as though it remembered every word ever spoken within it. The air in the attic was dense, heavy with something almost electric. She felt watched not by eyes, but by memory itself. She stood and ran her hand along the boards near the beam, tapping each gently. One of them made a hollow sound. Her pulse jumped. She pressed harder. The plank wobbled slightly beneath her fingertips. There was definitely space behind it. She grabbed a screwdriver from a nearby toolbox and began prying at the edges. It took effort. The nails were old but stubborn, buried deep by someone who hadn't wanted them removed. As the final plank came loose, the smell hit her first, a strange, stale scent of age and dampness, mixed with something faintly metallic. Her flashlight revealed a small cavity between the beams, maybe 3 feet deep. Inside were several wrapped bundles tied with string and coated in dust. She hesitated, then reached in. The paper crumbled under her touch, revealing photographs. Dozens of them, black and white Polaroids, each showing the same 2 girls, identical twins, maybe 9 years old, standing in front of a lake, a field, a swing set. In some, they smiled wide and carefree. In others, they looked frightened, glancing off camera as though someone had just spoken their names. Emily's throat went dry. These were her cousins, the missing Whitmore twins. But these photos, they weren't part of the official record. These were taken after the day they disappeared. Her hands trembled as she flipped through them. Each image seemed darker than the last, both in tone and in feeling. The final one stopped her breath entirely. The girls standing in the attic itself, their faces pale, their dresses torn, their eyes unfocused. Behind them, reflected faintly in a mirror that once hung on the wall, was a figure, a tall shape that seemed to lean forward, blurred by the flash. Emily dropped the photo. It landed face down on the floor. She backed away, heart hammering. "No," she whispered. "No, that can't be real." But the evidence was undeniable. Someone had been taking pictures after the official search ended. Someone who still had access to the house. She looked back into the hollow space and noticed another item tucked in the corner. A cassette tape in a cracked plastic case. The label was handwritten, July 8th, 1990. 2 days after the twins vanished. Her shaking fingers popped it open. She ran downstairs to the kitchen where her aunt's old cassette player sat atop the counter, coated in dust. It took 3 tries before it started to hum. The tape clicked into place and static filled the air. Then voices. A woman's voice first, faint and trembling. "Thomas." They said they saw them at the creek again. I told you they weren't gone." A man's voice answered, low, rough with exhaustion. "Margaret, stop. You need to let it go. It's not them." Silence. Then the sound of movement. Footsteps. The faint creak of wood. The woman again whispering. "The drawer opened by itself last night." The man's response came after a pause. "Then maybe it's time we seal for good." A loud bang, like a hammer striking wood. Then the sound cut out abruptly, swallowed by static. Emily stared at the player, numb. Her aunt's voice. Her uncle's voice. Recorded days after their daughters were declared missing, and they were talking about the drawer. She rewound it and played it again, listening for any background sound. Beneath the static, faint but present, she heard something else. Children humming the same lullaby she'd heard from the attic wall. The realization hit her like a cold wave. Her aunt hadn't gone mad. She'd been documenting what she believed were encounters, manifestations, something reaching out from between the walls. Emily sat back, pressing her palms to her face. She could almost feel the attic breathing above her, slow and steady. She thought what the librarian had said about the mirror, how it had vanished along with the twins. What if the mirror hadn't been stolen? What if it was part of the thing that took them? The reflection that didn't match the room. The mirror that wasn't just glass, but a door. The thought unsettled her so deeply she couldn't stay downstairs. She grabbed the flashlight again and climbed the stairs once more, compelled by something stronger than fear. When she reached the attic, she found that the air was colder now. Her breath misted in front of her. The little dresser sat where it always had, innocent and still. But the second drawer, the one her aunt's journal had warned her not to open, was now slightly ajar. She froze. The flashlight beam quivered in her trembling hand. "No," she whispered. "You were shut." Slowly, she crouched and reached for the handle. Inside lay a folded piece of paper. She pulled it out carefully and unfolded it. The handwriting was her aunt's, jagged and frantic. "If you hear them, don't answer. They know your name now." The paper fell from her hand. Her pulse roared in her ears. She stumbled backward, knocking into a crate. The music box toppled and began to play, its tune broken but unmistakable. The same lullaby, only slower, warped, like a memory trying to sing itself back to life. Emily bolted down the stairs, her flashlight beam jerking wildly across the walls. She didn't stop until she reached her car. Her hands shook as she tried to fit the keys into the ignition. The house loomed behind her, windows dark, silent, patient. When the engine finally turned over, she drove. The rain blurred everything into streaks of gray and silver. She didn't look back, not once. But even as she sped down the empty road, the song still played faintly in her head, as if she left the music box open, and it was following her. Emily didn't stop driving until the highway blurred into the fog-shrouded hills beyond Maple Hollow. The rain had softened into mist, and dawn was beginning to smudge the horizon, a faint gray bleeding into the trees. She pulled off a rest stop and sat there for a long time, hands still clenched on the steering wheel, heart pounding with the stubborn rhythm of fear that refused to fade. The lullaby echoed faintly in her ears, though she wasn't sure if it was real or just her mind replaying it. Her reflection in the rear-view mirror startled her. Her face was pale, her eyes wild. She looked like someone who'd seen a ghost and wasn't entirely sure she hadn't become one herself. "It's just an old house," she whispered. "Just stories." But even as she said it, she didn't believe it. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the last photograph she grabbed before leaving, the one of the twins standing in the attic. She turned it over. Written faintly on the back were 3 words. "Don't forget us." The handwriting wasn't her aunt's. It looked childish. Her throat tightened. She tucked the photo back into her pocket and leaned her head against the window. The forest outside was silent, its stillness oppressive. A strange feeling crept over her, like she wasn't alone in the car. She turned, slowly. The passenger seat was empty, but there was a faint indentation in the fabric, as if someone had just been sitting there. Emily's breath caught. She blinked hard, rubbed her eyes, and when she looked again, the seat was smooth. Empty. "This is madness," she whispered. "Sleep. You just need sleep." She drove to a small roadside motel, the kind with flickering neon and faded curtains. The clerk barely looked up as he handed her a key. Room 6. She locked the door twice, pulled the curtains shut, and set the cassette tape and the photos on the nightstand. But sleep didn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the twins' faces in the dark. One looking at her, the other looking past her, as if watching something standing right behind. By mid-morning, she gave up on rest. She turned on the motel's small TV, flicking through static until a local news channel appeared. The anchor was talking about the upcoming anniversary of the Whitmore disappearance. 35 years. Her aunt's face flashed briefly on the screen, younger, hopeful, during a 1991 interview. "I just want the truth," she said, voice trembling, "even if it hurts." Emily muted the sound. She stared at the image, a memory she hadn't lived but could feel. The ache in her aunt's voice wasn't madness. It was love curdled by silence. She opened her laptop and began searching online for anything about Sheriff Daniels. Most results were old obituaries, police records, fragments of rumor. Then she found a thread on an old message board, dated 2003. Someone claiming to be Daniel's son had written, "My father used to wake up screaming about the attic. Said he saw something in the mirror that wasn't his reflection. Said it smiled back." Emily's stomach turned. She clicked through the replies. One stood out, a user named Hollow Creek 91 who had posted a cryptic response. The twins didn't vanish. They crossed. She stared at the screen. Crossed. The word throbbed in her head like a warning. Cross what? A line? A threshold? A mirror? She packed up her things. Whatever had started in that attic wasn't finished with her. She could feel it, like a rope tugging her backward through time. And maybe, deep down, she wanted to understand. Back in Maple Hollow, the sky hung low and colorless. The air was thick with that same wet wood scent that seemed to follow her. She drove first to the sheriff's old office, now a storage annex of the county records department. The clerk there, an older man with sharp eyes, agreed to let her search through some archives. 2 hours later, buried beneath old police reports, she found something. A sealed envelope marked supplemental evidence, case hashtag 90-7B, restricted. Inside were 2 Polaroids she hadn't seen before. One showed Sheriff Daniels standing in the attic beside the mirror. The other showed the mirror alone, or rather, what was reflected in it. Emily's breath froze. The reflection didn't match the room. The walls were wrong, angled differently, and in the reflection's background stood the twins barefoot, holding hands, their eyes dark as oil. She turned the photo over. Scrawled on the back in shaky handwriting, "Do not touch the glass." That was when she heard the knock. 3 slow taps on the archive room door. She looked up sharply. "Hello?" No answer. She crossed to the door and opened it. The hallway was empty, silent, humming faintly with fluorescent light. But as she turned back, she saw something on the table she knew hadn't been there before. A small, dust-covered compact mirror, the kind a woman might carry in her purse. Her pulse raced. She reached for it hesitantly, her reflection warping in its tarnished surface. The glass shimmered faintly, distorting the shape of her eyes. For just a second, she thought she saw a movement. Not behind her, but inside the mirror, 2 small figures, standing in the gray fog beyond the reflection, holding hands. She gasped and dropped it. The mirror cracked, splintering into spiderweb veins across its surface. The overhead lights flickered once, then steadied. The air grew heavy again, that same metallic tang she'd smelled in the attic. She left the building, heart hammering. But even in daylight, the shadows seemed too sharp. She drove back toward the house. She told herself it was just to put everything back, to close whatever she'd opened. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. She couldn't leave the mystery half-told. When she arrived, dusk was setting in. The house waited in silence, its windows reflecting only the gray of the dying day. Inside, the air was still but not empty. It felt expectant. She climbed the stairs once more, the same creaking steps, the same narrow hall. The attic door was ajar now. She hadn't left it that way. Inside, moonlight filtered through the small window, illuminating the space in pale silver. The little dresser sat quietly, but something new waited beside it. A mirror. It was full-length, ornate, its frame carved with faded symbols. She froze. This hadn't been there before, yet she recognized it instantly. It was the mirror from the photographs. Her breath came shallow. She took a cautious step forward. Her reflection met her eyes, wider, paler, but hers. The surface rippled faintly, like a pond disturbed by a drop of rain. And then, just for an instant, her reflection smiled. But she hadn't. She stumbled backward, knocking into a trunk. The sound broke the trance. The mirror went still again. Her reflection stared back, expressionless. She whispered, voice shaking, "Were you?" No answer, just the faintest hum from the glass, almost like a sigh. Her flashlight flickered, then died completely, plunging the attic into shadow. In the half-dark, the air seemed alive. And somewhere near the dresser, very faintly, 2 small voices began to hum the lullaby again. Emily's tears broke free. "Please," she whispered into the dark. "What do you want?" The humming stopped. And then, from inside the mirror, 2 faint handprints appeared, child-sized, pressing against the other side of the glass. Emily stumbled backward until her spine hit the slanted wall. The breath knocked out of her. The attic felt smaller now, the air thick, trembling with a kind of quiet that wasn't stillness. It was watching her, listening. The faint outlines of twins' handprints lingered on the mirror's surface, pale against the glass like frost. She could see their fingers spread wide, almost delicate, as if they were pressing from some other side, begging to be remembered or released. Her throat tightened. "You're not real," she whispered. But even as she said it, a tear slipped down her cheek, because deep down, she knew they were real, just not here anymore, not in any way that made sense. The mirror shimmered again, faintly. For a second, she thought she saw her Aunt Margaret's reflection instead of her own, older, eyes hollow, face drawn with exhaustion and grief. Then it was gone. Only her own terrified face stared back. Emily forced herself to breathe, to focus. She crouched low beside the mirror, searching for any sign of a trick, a light source, a hidden projector, something rational to ground her. But the attic was empty, silent except for her heartbeat. And then she saw it, carved faintly into the mirror's wooden frame, almost invisible beneath the dust. The same handwriting from her aunt's notes, those tight, frantic letters. 2 went in. 1 stayed. Her hand shook as she traced the words. 2 went in, she murmured. 1 stayed where? As if an answer, the music box on the floor began to turn on its own. The melody creaked out into the room, warped, sorrowful. The air seemed to ripple with the sound. Emily's flashlight flickered again, just long enough for her to see the dresser drawer slowly sliding open. "No," she whispered, backing away. "Don't." But open all the way this time, revealing something she hadn't seen before, a small wooden doll, crudely carved, dressed in a tiny blue fabric dress, the same as the one the twins had worn in the photographs. She picked it up with trembling fingers. The wood was cold, damp. Beneath the hem of the little dress, someone had carved initials into the base. L.W. and A.W. Lila and Anna Whitmore. The attic seemed to exhale. Emily sank to her knees, tears welling in her eyes. "What happened to you?" she whispered to the air. "Who did this?" And that was when she heard it, a voice, faint but clear, coming from somewhere within the walls. Not the humming this time. Words. A whisper, like the breath of wind through the beams. He said the mirror would fix it. Emily froze. Her flashlight flickered back on, but she barely noticed. Her gaze darted to the far corner of the attic, where the wall board she pried open still gaped slightly. The voice came again, softer this time, 2 overlapping tones. The same voice, but doubled, like twins speaking in unison. He said we'd see the world the way he did. She crawled closer, her pulse hammering. Who said that? Who's there? No answer. Just a faint echo of the lullaby again, drifting from within the wall. From somewhere impossibly deep. Her aunt's journal flashed through her mind. Thomas says it's balance. I say it's madness. Her uncle. Emily's breath hitched. What did you do, Uncle Thomas? She grabbed the flashlight, shining it into the cavity again. Behind the space where she'd found the photographs, she noticed something she'd missed before, a section of floor that didn't match the rest. It was darker, newer. She reached out and pressed against it. It shifted slightly. She pried it up with shaking hands. Beneath it lay another object wrapped in old linen. She pulled it free and unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a second cassette tape. The label read simply, "From Margaret." Her fingers trembled as she slid it into her pocket and ran downstairs to play it on the same old recorder. The tape clicked, hissed, and began. A man's voice, Thomas Whitmore's, filled the room. "If you're hearing this, Maggie, it didn't work. I thought I could fix what the mirror showed. I thought I could bring them back. But it wasn't them anymore. They looked like our girls, but they didn't know me. Their eyes, Maggie, their eyes were wrong." Emily froze. The voice cracked, trembling with guilt. "The mirror isn't glass. It's, God, I don't know what it is. I only know it listens. I try to close it, but it keeps calling. Every night I hear them. Not the girls. The thing pretending to be them. It knows their names. It knows mine. If it finds you, don't look into it. Don't open the drawer. Don't listen when it sings." The sound of labored breathing filled the silence. Then, a single word whispered like a dying breath. "Forgive me." The tape ended. Emily stared at the recorder, frozen in disbelief. Her uncle had built something above the beams, something meant to contain the mirror, or maybe to hide it, but he'd failed. Whatever lived in that reflection had learned their names, their faces, their grief, and used it. Outside, thunder rumbled. The lights flickered. Emily looked up and saw her own reflection staring back at her from the darkened window. But her reflection wasn't moving with her. It tilted its head slowly, almost curiously, as though it were watching her. Her body went cold. She turned away from the window and whispered to the empty room, "You can't have me." But the air had already changed. The faint hum returned, rising now like a whisper in her ear. A voice, childlike distant, spoke softly. "You came back. You always do." Emily stumbled backward. Clutching the cassette, the house groaned. Somewhere upstairs, she heard the slow creak of the attic door swinging open again. Her legs refused to move at first. But something, maybe fear, maybe defiance, pulled her back toward the stairs. If the mirror was a door, if her uncle said it open it, then maybe she could close it for good. The climb felt endless this time. Each step seemed to stretch, echoing longer than it should have. When she reached the top, the attic light was already on, warm, golden, like it had been in the photograph. The mirror stood at the center of the room now, no longer against the wall, but facing the door. Her reflection waited inside, but it wasn't alone. Two pale shapes stood beside it, the twins. They smiled faintly, their faces both beautiful and terrible. Emily whispered, voice trembling, "What do you want from me?" The reflection of one twin lifted her hand and pressed it against the inside of the glass. The surface rippled outward like water. And then, so softly it barely reached Emily's ears, the reflection of her aunt appeared behind them, whispering words she couldn't quite make out. But she understood their shape. The mirror began to glow faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. Emily stepped closer, tears streaming down her face. She thought of her aunt, her cousins, her uncle's voice trembling on that last recording. She whispered back, "I'll finish what you couldn't." The attic's air thickened, heavy and wet. The lullaby began again, slower now, unraveling into notes that sounded almost human, almost pleading. She took one final step toward the mirror. Her reflection did the same, except it wasn't her anymore. Its eyes were hollow, its mouth curved in a smile she didn't recognize. Emily reached out, her fingertips brushing the surface. It was cold as stone. For a heartbeat, the world held still. Then the mirror cracked, once sharply, splitting her reflection down the middle. The attic lights burst, plunging everything into darkness. The morning came in fragments, gray, muffled, and uncertain. Rain clung to the windows like fog breath, and the air inside the Whitmore house was still, carrying only the faint scent of dust and something metallic. Emily awoke on the attic floor, her head pounding, shards of broken glass glittering around her like frost. The mirror lay in pieces. For a few seconds, she couldn't remember where she was. The night before felt like a dream that had left its imprint, a nightmare too vivid to dismiss. Her body ached, her throat dry as if she'd been screaming. When she tried to stand, the wooden floorboards groaned beneath her weight, as though the house itself were exhaling after years of holding its breath. She glanced around. The dresser was still there. The drawer, the cursed one, hung open slightly. The doll she'd found earlier was gone. The music box lay silent beside her, its metal key bent, as if twisted by a hand too small yet too strong. Her heart quickened. "Lila? Anna?" she whispered, barely able to hear her own voice over the drumming rain. There was no reply, only the steady tick of the old clock from downstairs. Emily forced herself to gather her things. The flashlight, her aunt's notebook, the cracked cassette. She stumbled down the attic steps, each creak echoing in her ears. The house looked different. The wallpaper along the hallway had peeled further overnight, revealing faint scribbles underneath, childlike drawings in pencil, two girls holding hands. Beneath them, written over and over again, "Come home." Her knees nearly gave way. She followed the faint light seeping in from the living room. The old recorder still sat on the table where she'd left it. For a moment, she thought she saw movement in the reflection of the window, two small figures standing just behind her. But when she turned, the room was empty. Emily dropped onto the couch, head in her hands. "It's over," she whispered. "It has to be over." But the silence that followed didn't agree. The sound began faintly at first, a whisper under the rain. Then Gradually, a soft humming again. That same lullaby, but weaker now, slower, as though it were fading away. She looked up. The source wasn't the attic this time. It was coming from outside. Emily rose, walked to the window, and pushed it open. Cold rain hit her face. She peered out toward the backyard, the overgrown garden her aunt had once tended. In the far corner, near the rotted fence, something glimmered beneath the mud. A wooden box, half buried. Her pulse quickened. She grabbed her coat and stepped into the rain. The air outside was thick, heavy with petrichor and decay. Each step squelched through the wet earth. She knelt beside the box and wiped away the mud. It was old, cedarwood, the latch rusted shut. She pried it open with trembling fingers. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, some water damaged, some burned around the edges. The twins at different ages, birthday parties, picnics, Christmas mornings. But in every single photo, one detail stayed the same. In the background, barely visible, was a mirror, sometimes in a corner, sometimes behind the girls, sometimes even in places it shouldn't have been, like outside, reflecting something that wasn't there. Her stomach twisted. She flipped through faster, each picture worse than the last. In one, the twins smiled wide, frosting on their lips, but their eyes were hollowed out with shadow. In another, her Uncle Thomas stood beside them, a hand on each shoulder, but his reflection in the mirror behind them had no face. At the bottom of the box lay a final photograph. The attic again, but this time the mirror was cracked, and standing in front of it was her Aunt Margaret, holding a hammer. The back of the photo bore a date, March 12, 1990, the day the twins disappeared. Emily sank into the mud, staring at it. Her aunt had tried to destroy the mirror long before her uncle's final recording. She must have known it wasn't just a symbol of guilt. It was the source. The rain poured harder, cold seeping into Emily's skin. For a brief moment, she thought she heard laughter. Two voices, faint and distant, carried by the wind. She turned toward the house. Through the attic window, a faint light flickered. Her heart stopped. The mirror was broken. She had seen it shatter. But something, some reflection, still moved in that window. Emily forced herself to go back inside. She climbed the stairs slowly, every step echoing like a heartbeat. At the top, the attic door was open again, though she was certain she had closed it. The shards of the mirror glittered faintly on the floor. But now, scattered among them, she saw something else. Small footprints, damp, leading toward the wall. "Please," she whispered, tears burning her eyes. "You don't have to stay here." For a moment, the air softened, as if the house itself was listening. Then, a small voice replied, a whisper so fragile it seemed to dissolve into the rain. "We can't leave. Not until she forgives him." Emily's chest tightened. She knew then what she had to do. She pulled her aunt's journal from her bag, flipping to the final pages. Near the end, she found one entry she hadn't noticed before, written in smeared ink, shaky handwriting. "If they ever find this house again, tell them I forgive him. Tell them I forgive Thomas. Tell them I understand." Emily read the words aloud, her voice trembling. She forgave him. The attic seemed to sigh. The flickering light in the shards dimmed, one by one, until only a faint glow remained in the largest piece, the one that still reflected her face. This time, her reflection smiled softly. Behind her, the faint outlines of two girls appeared, holding hands, their expressions calm. They looked at her for one long, aching moment, then turned away, fading into light. The attic fell completely silent. Emily sank to her knees, crying quietly, not from fear, but release. By the time the storm passed, the house no longer felt alive. It was just a house again. Dust would memory. Later, when she left, she locked the front door behind her and dropped the key into the overgrown ivy by the porch. She didn't look back. As she reached her car, she saw something in the rear-view mirror, a flicker in the attic window, just one final glint of light. But this time it wasn't haunting. It was peaceful. Still, as the engine started, she thought she heard that lullaby one last time, faint, wistful, like a farewell whispered through the rain. And when she drove away down the long, empty road, the Whitmore house finally stood still. But inside, in the quiet attic drawer, the music box turned once more on its own, releasing a single, broken note into the dark. After the storm, Ridgeway slept again. The Whitmore house stood empty, quiet as a confession. Emily left it behind, yet it followed her, in dreams and reflections, in every flicker of light that caught her eye. She told herself it was over, but endings rarely come clean. At night, she still heard the twins' lullaby, faint as breath behind glass. Some mornings, she'd find her notebook open, words she didn't remember writing. It still listens. She moved from place to place, never staying long, yet something always caught up. The sound of rain on wood, the scent of dust and pine, the shadow of two small figures in the corner of her mirror. Weeks later, a letter arrived with no return address. Inside was a Polaroid of the attic, neat and sunlit, except for the doll sitting upright by the drawer. On the back, a message: "We heard your voice." Emily returned to Ridgeway once more. The house greeted her in silence. Everything looked undisturbed, as though waiting. In the attic, the mirror shards were gone, swept away. But the air hummed faintly, pulsing with the rhythm of her own heartbeat. She whispered, "It's over now." The house creaked in reply, an old sound like memory shifting. And then from the corner, two voices in unison. "You freed us," but it's still listening. The air turned cold. The light dimmed. And in that silence, Emily finally understood. Some echoes never fade. They just change who's listening. Months later, Emily's research surfaced, an unfinished manuscript titled The House That Heard Itself. It contained family records, transcribed journal pages, and one final note in her handwriting. It doesn't end with silence. It waits for sound. The file spread quietly online. Some called it fiction, others an unsolved mystery. Those who listened to the attached recording swore they heard more than her voice, a faint hum, like the house breathing beneath her words. Soon after, the Ridgeway property was rebuilt. A new family moved in, unaware. Their daughter told her parents she had two friends named Lila and Anna. They laughed, until the music box appeared on her shelf, playing by itself at night. One morning, they found small handprints on the window, though no one in the house was that small. The family left within weeks. Local police found nothing unusual, only a message scrawled in dust on the attic floor. "It listens when you remember." Online, the legend grew. Listeners claimed that if you play Emily's recording backward, you can hear a child whisper, "Forget us." But no one ever does. Because every time the rain falls in Ridgeway, someone new hears the lullaby. And once you've heard it, you're part of the house too.